It was a soft, gentle night. And time to start a podcast.
All right, Professor.
I'm laughing. Hey, what are you trying to murder me? No, only cut your truck. No, only cut your truck. No, only cut your truck. Only cut your truck. Only cut your truck. No, only cut your truck. Only cut your truck.
Okay, everybody. This is the road to Shangri-La, an International ICP Podcast. You're here with me, DJ BO. No stops, no caps, no brags, just facts. And I'm here with Dirty Hair, Dan Fitztastic. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, DJ Danny Fitz here. How's it going with you, BO?
DJ Danny Fitz, what a schmuck. Anyway, this is the Intersectional International Insane CIown Podcast, a peripatetic, psychopathic podcast. It's whoop whoop from around the world. So,
indeed,
that's what's up. And so, what are we doing here? Well, let's break this down a little bit. I'm DJ BO, and I'm from Florida, but I live in Shanghai. And where are you broadcasting from right now, Dan?
Grenada in the West Indies. Beautiful, beautiful Caribbean paradise.
Yeah, so this is truly an international podcast, and it's going to be an ICP podcast. And what we hope to do is each week break down a different aspect of their career. We'll get through all the major Joker cards, the major albums from ICP, but we also want to go through their films, through articles about them, podcasts they've done, all sorts of the Juggalo verse. Juggalo universe, Juggalo verse, however you want to say it. We hope to get some special guests on here, and we also hope to make it intersectional. We hope to talk about broader aspects of the culture through different prisms, whether it be sexism, regionalism, racism, all sorts of things. Sound about right, Dan?
Sounds about right.
So that's what's up, and we expect about 4 people to listen to this. Dan's listening right now. I'm only half listening, so we're at about 1.5. And if we get, a couple more, we'll be right on path. And that's what's up. But before we continue, let's both introduce ourselves a little bit. Dan, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go with what's up with me. So I'm the other peripatetic here, Danny Fitz. I've been doing what's your say on that one, BO?
You're peripatetic is what you are. Yeah.
Peripatetics here. Took that one from Calvin and Hobbes. So anyways, I've been doing radio DJing for about 10 years, maybe a little bit more than that, back in Gainesville, Florida, from where Brian and I know each other. And since then, I moved to Grenada about 7 years ago, did a jazz radio show and a rock and roll radio show for a while. But I am living here in Grenada, traveling, just living life to its fullest, teaching at SGU, St. George's University here. What about you, BO?
Whoa! So what are you doing at the university? People should know.
So I'm a bug nerd. So there's entomology, and I teach that at the university here at the vet school. And so, in addition to my fun little side gigs as a DJ and stuff, but the job that pays me is to show up and teach vet students. And a little bit of work on honeybees, a little bit of work on mosquitoes, a little bit of work on whatever.
I'm already bored. Okay, that's enough.
See, I knew you only half listened. We were talking about this. You only listen to the half that comes out of your mouth. I got it.
One more thing. You have a blog. What is your specialty? Interesting blog there.
Oh, absolutely. The most important mission of my life right now. Technically, I guess this is the beginning of the second most important. The other important mission of my life, rather. The first most important mission of my life is to try every single roti in Grenada. So if you don't know what a roti is, it's basically like a curried potato and chicken burrito. That's a big deal down here in the Southern Caribbean. Can be served in several different ways. And my goal is to find out, and I have a rating system to go with it. Instagram.com/Grenada Roadies. You can find out all about it.
Well, we'll get you your plugs later, but you do rotis, you're there studying bugs, you're in the tropical Caribbean, you're doing good. So as for myself, I am DJ BO, and I'm from South Florida, a little shithole suburb outside of Fort Lauderdale, and I went to college in Gainesville at the University of Florida, where I met Dirty Hair Dan Fitztastic, and involved in the music scene there. Dan and I were in a band there called The Factor, ultra conservative punk band. And after that, I lived in the country of Mongolia, first with the Peace Corps, then independently. Went back to South Florida, where I worked as a MC and a dancer for a party company called Platinum Gold. Danced at the halftime show for the Super Bowl, and then moved to where I currently live in Shanghai, where I make my living as a professional DJ and event producer. Recently, I finished about a 2-month run also teaching the history of rock and roll to students at Duke Kunshan University. That's the Duke University campus out here. And I've DJ'd in 28 countries, 22 cities here in China. I likes to get around. And yeah, I'm just kind of doing my thing. We're just getting over the pandemic, looking what I can do, and just living the bum lifestyle. I don't want to say that. I work pretty hard, but nothing on anything that I don't want to do at really any given time. Sound about right, Dan? Did I miss anything important?
That seems like more or less your vibe. You got that, more or less.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about our personal histories with the Insane Clown Posse, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, let's mention that we were planning to go to the Gathering of the Juggalos here in 2020, Dan and I. And we'll get into the reasons why we're not in a bit. But I was super excited. In fact, I hate most music festivals. I'm not interested in music festivals. I'd rather be indoors in a club for a music show. But this festival I was super interested in. One of the things that, well, let me back up. I first heard ICP when they were playing, they played a few of their songs on the radio in South Florida. There was that game show Mega Mix song, which I'm forgetting, which combined a couple songs. I apologize for not remembering the name of the song. That was in the late 90s. And that, but I had the album The Great Malenko, their big major label record there, and I really didn't like it at first. Didn't really get into it, but I'm also very much interested in art that other people kind of denigrate. I like to check it out. I like to explore things. Like, I'm the guy who will listen to the Paris Hilton music album or see movies that people might put down. And I was super fascinated by ICP. One of the main things that got me interested in them was Nathan Rabine's articles about them, which I found he also shares, I think, a fascination with these sort of things that are put down in our culture. And I decided to check out their catalog some more. The Amazing Jekyll Brothers is an album that I like. I would check out their singles when they came out, the single they did with Jack White. I would check out their music videos and I'd watch the infomercials. I can't say, like, other than the Amazing Jekyll Brothers, I was a huge fan or I checked out too much, but as a hip-hop fan, as someone who's a DJ and into pop culture, I would keep tabs on what they were doing. And I always appreciated their sort of underground DIY spirit, especially the DIY attitude. And yeah, I think that kind of covers it. Oh, I really love the documentary, A Family Underground, which we'll be getting to next week here on the podcast, because I like those sort of underground subcultures. But I think that really kind of covers it. Dan, what about you?
So I'm coming to this from the perspective of somebody who's not necessarily as big of a hip hop fan as BO is.
Yes, sir.
But I do like hip hop quite a bit. But I came to my first exposure, I would say, to Insane Clown Posse was back in high school, because back then you couldn't escape the clutches of TRL if you were a fan of contemporary music as a teenager. And so plenty of bands like Limp Bizkit and Korn and a lot of other kind of their contemporaries of sorts with ICP of the kind of rap rock vibe were really super popular at that point. So you couldn't help but at least come across The Great Malenko or something like that back when we were in high school. Now, I didn't necessarily it didn't really register with me. I was like, okay, this is another decent group. They got a shtick, as it were, which I'm not above shticks. The Factor was indeed, a great piece of theater that that ultra conservative punk band that BO and I were in. So I'm certainly not above a really good idea turned into a concept for a group. But, went on and did my indie hipster ways back in college, got into, as BO knows, my favorite band at the time in 2005 and 6 when he and I spent most of our time together was the Decemberists. So he gives me crap about that.
Still is.
That's what you say. So anyways, he's gonna drop references to that from time to time here throughout the podcast. But that said, I've always really been into music or pieces of culture or just interesting stuff about, like you said, subcultures that are oppressed or hated for reasons and just outcast. I'm just a big fan of Outkast. The band, not just the Atlanta duo, but also Outkast of all kinds. And so,
sure.
Or things that people tend to denigrate amongst the hipster culture that I come to as trash culture, the Guy Fieri's of the world. I love that stuff. I'm a junk foodie to the max. Had a giant ass burrito for dinner and I'm absolutely excited about it. It was great stuff. I love what other people call trash culture, but I also want to find out also from what, and juggalos are something I've always as a subculture been attracted to, and now I'm getting into the music kind of afterwards. I saw American Juggalo, kind of a short documentary, and I really dug that and kind of the culture of the Juggalo community and the vibe of the gathering of the Juggalos, because stealing a line from DJ BO here, it's one of the last punk festivals. It's not punk music per se, but it's a punk festival insofar as it's self-funded, lots of good music. It's still one of the kind of meccas for hip hop, for hip hop culture when it comes to festivals nowadays. And so I thought, okay, this is interesting. I'm really curious about checking out what the Gathering of the Juggalos is about. So BO and I planned on going to the Gathering of the Juggalos in 2020. Lo and behold, that didn't come together. So we're kind of using this podcast as an excuse to get to know the group a little bit more. Like I said, I know a few of their songs. Miracles, of course, made the rounds in the meme universe about 10 years ago. And that's probably the most exposure I had to them. But here and there songs, here and there documentaries, but I wouldn't say I know as much. So part of this is kind of digging into it, intellectualizing it, and picking out I'm going to try to give a fair assessment of it. But part of this is to kind of dissect what is interesting about taste. Why do we have the taste that we have? Yeah. And why do we malign things in outcast communities like we do when they don't necessarily deserve it? Or maybe there's aspects of it where they love this stuff and maybe it's not that good. We're going to take that apart in this podcast. That's what attracted me to this project.
Absolutely. I think you and I both agree that we like to look things in their face and not really try to, judge them on the merits specifically and not try to bring in outside influence on what society might think we should look at something with. So, I love, you mentioned trash culture. I like to say, old weird America, which is a term Grail Marcus, I believe, put together. And, Dan and I took Greyhound buses across the United States, and actually some of my most favorite experiences involving ICP were hanging out with juggalos riding Greyhound buses. And I've always sincerely enjoyed it. And there's also some negative things I think we're going to get to when we talk about their first album today. Here when we get into Carnival of Carnage, if I haven't mentioned that yet. But Dan, why don't you talk us a little bit about what we're going to call this segment the Gather Patter. What's the latest on the world of ICP right now?
Well, as many of you know, and as many of you are probably experiencing right now, we're right in the middle of this pandemic thing that's going on. Who knew, right? Is that news to you? That's news to me. But so ICP has been doing the Gathering for, I think it's 20 years now.
Gathering of the Juggalos.
The Gathering of the Juggalos. And so we were really excited about the idea to go to Ohio this year to go see it. Alas, as has been expected, Insane Clown Posse, as we well know, are good stewards of their people, and they don't want their people to come down with COVID. So what they did is they released a press release about 3 weeks ago. The Gathering of the Juggalos postponed until next year due to COVID-19. And so it's a really good little press release there, but I'll give you the I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can go find it. We'll make sure to put it up on our Instagram as well as on our on YouTube, a link to that so that you guys can read it yourself in full. But as I said here, with tens of thousands of deaths due to COVID outbreak, we can't possibly in good conscience even consider trying to put on a gathering during these difficult times. And so as it says here is, the entire music industry is at a dead halt due to the quarantine, and this, along with the uncertainty of how things will eventually pan out, has made it impossible to move forward with the 2020 GOTJ. So that aside, the bottom line is we simply refuse to risk even one juggalo life by hosting a gathering during these troubling times. They are good citizens amongst many other things. And so we respect that. Be safe, they said. Watch your step and take it easy. You can't replace what you mean to our team. Without you, tell me where the fuck we'd be. Look at that. They care about their fans. We will endure this as a family, and the Gathering of the Juggalos will return in 2021, stronger, bigger, and better than other. Whoop, whoop.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think they are a group that genuinely cares about their fans, and that's been demonstrated by actions they've done across the years, whether it's the FBI march or fundraisers for some of their fans on hard times. And I definitely think this is an example of that.
For sure. And that's the thing, is we want to get to know this culture a little bit better, not from like a sociological, let's make fun of them thing, because that's definitely not the vibe that me and BO come into. We want to understand we are attracted to this culture, and we want to get to know what's good and bad about it and check it out and be a little part of it at next year's gathering.
Absolutely. So, this week, our first week, we are breaking down the first Joker's card, the first card in the deck for the Insane CIown Posse, their debut album, first proper album, which is the Carnival of Carnage, which was released in October 18, 1992. So here's a couple pop cultural things that I think are relevant to that came out around the same time, all definitely in 1992. So just 8 days before this, the debut of the AIDS quilt was opened up in Washington, D.C., which, of course, was a major deal because you're starting after Ronald Reagan, of course, refused to talk about AIDS. We're now talking about this mostly, sexual and drug passed on disease. And I think a lot of these themes might be reflected in ICP's music. I mean, we're talking about, would it be considered a pandemic, Dan? Would that be the term?
I don't know if it was quite to that level of what we would call, like we're calling COVID, but it definitely was a growing problem where people refused to acknowledge its existence.
Absolutely.
And of course, as a way to marginalize subcultures, the LGBT community was definitely hit hard by it. And
the drug communities.
And the drug communities. So two outcast communities that were really hit hard, but they didn't call it a pandemic, I don't think.
Well, whatever. I don't know. You know, these science. I think science is overrated, but whatever. On the same month as ICP releases Carnival of Carnage, the debut of the Cartoon Network opens up on October 1st, and so we're starting to get these childhood imagery and things and promote it for adults. Oftentimes, something here. In 1992, Mortal Kombat is released, and it's the first video arcade game to get a mature rating by the ESRB. Very interesting connection there. And on May 1st is the Lyndhurst High School shooting, a major shooting event that happened in California. And that's what we're going to cover for now. In terms of what's going on in pop culture during Carnival of Carnage. Dan, what are some albums that were released in 1992?
So that was, of course, probably the biggest thing in the general pop culture thing is this was Nirvana. This is Nirvana hitting their heyday right then. 1991, Nevermind comes out. Smells Like Teen Spirit is riding the top of the charts at the beginning of 1992. But if we're going in terms of looking squarely at the hip-hop universe, this was the heyday of gangsta rap. Of course, a lot of great West Coast groups are putting out stuff. But then we got, for instance, one of the albums that came out that year that was probably one of the big landmark ones, came out earlier in the year, was Ice Cube's The Predator. That one, of course, biggest track on that one was It Was a Good Day. immaculate, immortal hip hop track. You may also have heard of Body Count. That's Ice-T's group. They, of course, came out with Cop Killer, which thematically is going to tie in a lot of with what we're going on. Bushwick Bill, of course, of Ghetto Boys, released his solo album that year as well. And as we'll talk about, Ghetto Boys definitely had an influence on the ICP horrorcore kind of vibe. And probably I would say easily the most landmark album of that year in terms of the evolution of hip hop would be Dr. Dre's The Chronic. It came out a few weeks after Carnival of Carnage did, but as you probably know, Dr. Dre, The Chronic, possibly one of the top 10 most influential hip hop albums, certainly of the decade, definitely probably the most renowned album of that year. But
super overrated.
Yeah, it's got some tracks on it. But that said, is stepping aside from gangster rap, there are also two other really great kind of, I wouldn't call it alternative hip hop, but definitely different vibes that were starting to come out at the time. So rather than going with the purely East Coast, West Coast game, which is what a lot of, as we'll talk about, a lot of what ICP was listening to at the time, two of the other albums that really were big influences on me and some on them were Beastie Boys' Check Your Head. Great album. It's not quite Paul's Boutique in the history of hip hop, but still a very solid album. As we'll talk about, Pass the Mic is my favorite song from that, which they, of course, ICP samples on this album. And Arrested Development is 3 years, 5 months, 2 days in the life of Arrested Development also came out in 1992 as well. So kind of bringing the Southern hip hop thing, getting that going, but also bringing a different kind of vibe, kind of antithetical to the gangsta rap heyday that was going on at the time. So anyways, those are the 5 albums or songs. Cop Killer, The Predator by Ice Cube, Dr. Dre's The Chronic, Check Your Head by Beastie Boys, and Arrested Development, 3 years, 5 months, and 2 days in the life of. That kind of pop into my mind as BFDs in 1992 hip hop.
Yeah, and especially the Arrested Development album, which I really dig. I mean, talk about thematically opposite of what we're going to be talking about. That album is about moving down to Tennessee and finding your roots. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Anyway, so let's break this down. We're talking about ICP's debut album, Carnival of Carnage. Dan, what are your general feelings about the album?
General feelings about the album. So we'll start off, well, let me give a little history also of what I think is the funniest thing about this album is, so when it came out in 1992, it was of course released locally. And it sold 17 copies the day it was released. That's at least what the band claims, 17 copies. It, of course, went on to become gold by 2010, so over 500,000 copies. And so it's one of those things that immediately tells you, okay, this is obviously a very super local, super small level thing. And it blew up. It took, I mean, how many albums can you think of that took 18 years to really like go from like 17 to 500,000? I thought that really is just kind of a remarkable thing that it tells you about the growing of the band and their kind of the growing of their mystique. That said, overall, we'll talk about some of the pros and the cons of this album. As far as their stuff, I think there's definitely lots of good ideas on this, but as we'll talk about, the dudes in the band at the time were between 18 and 20, and a lot of that shows. They wear their taste on their shoulder or on their sleeves, and it shows. But for the most part, I've enjoyed it more than I expected I would going into it and going into what I read about it. What about you?
Yeah, like the album has some potential. It suffers from a lack of lyrical precision. I think there's points where they really don't have a very strong voice. I think they were still really finding it. And I don't think their development in their flow and just the perspectives were really where they needed to be and where they would eventually start getting to. I think the production is very limited, even compared to some things at the times where it's not very sonically diverse. One of the major problems on the album is I think it's way too long. A lot of albums in early 90s, that's when you really got the heyday of the CD, and artists really thought they had to fill out the CD length, which was longer than the cassette and previously the vinyl. And so at 66 minutes, it's just too much, especially for an album that's not very sonically diverse. The album would have been much better at 45 minutes. If you could, I think you could easily cut 20 minutes off of it and really not lose any sort of the impact or lose the ability to get into their world in the way they were doing things. And a lot of the, we'll probably talk about this a lot. They do a lot of outrage. They use outrage as a form a lot. And that's something that I'm very comfortable with in a lot of ways. But in some ways they do it here, I don't really find interesting or worthwhile.
Okay.
These are very angry people. They're angry against the South, which is a major point, and they're really angry towards women. And there's a lot of anger in hip hop, especially in the early 90s. But to me, I'm really fine with that, but it should be kind of focused in a way where it's almost justified in a way.
For sure.
Does that make sense?
For sure. Well, here, let's start off with this way then. Let's start off with some good points. I like to start everything on the good side of the coin, so we're going to start off with some pros, and then we'll turn to some of the cons of the album, because there's definitely some good points of this. So I'll go with a little bit of my first one, so you tell me what you think, because we haven't bounced this off of each other, so it'll be fun. I'm having fun watching BO's reactions in real time, just like you're hearing them and watching them in real time. So one of the first things that I really liked about this is I think that they clearly wear their taste on their sleeves. One of the reviews from this, from allmusic.com of the album, they gave it 3 stars, but they did not seem to have a lot of love for this. But I think the thing that they said is that all ICP want to do is rock the house as if they were a third-rate Beastie Boys supported by a cut-rate Faith No More, all tempered with the sensibility that make Gwar cult heroes. And you know what? I'm okay with it. Okay, so they listen to a lot of good hip hop, and the thing about it is they really represent, both in their samples and in their style, they're really, you could say in a good way that they're paying respect to their forefathers. You could say in a bad way that they're just very derivative. But let's see. So the samples that they used Prince's Kiss on the Juggalo. They are renowned Prince fans. Great one. They used Black Sabbath on Never Had It Made. I believe it was The Wizard. On the last track, which is, as I'll talk about, one of my favorites, they did, which is Taste, which has a lot of great guest verses on it. They got Booker T and the MG's Melting Pot. They got The Crunch by Led Zeppelin. And then by way of the Beastie Boys' Pass the Mic, which came out earlier in 1992, they sampled a really great 3-second loop from Johnny Hammond's Big Sur Suite. Great, Johnny Hammond Smith. Great jazz organist, very underrated, and just great bass riff that kind of leads off the track. And Beastie Boys made it immortal, and these guys took it and kind of made it their own thing on Taste. So I think they had a lot of great samples.
I see. This is an interesting point, because this is a little bit derived from interviews I've heard with them, and things they said. I think you're putting too much. You're giving too much weight in the things that they're sampling from, but I guess that depends on if we consider their producer, Mikey Clark, to be a member of the Insane CIown Posse, which I don't necessarily think he is. I don't think he didn't work on all their albums by any means, because I don't really see the ICP guys as really being fans of anything but hardcore hip hop. So maybe I don't think they recognize necessarily the idea or the significance of using a Black Sabbath sample, which I got to mention, Ice-T was the first person to sample Black Sabbath from. We'll talk a little bit about that in a bit.
So one other thing I'll get into here is that I thought was really cool, and I know they didn't mean to because it's purely accidental, but I really love the intro track. The intro track where it's got a very kind of so one of my favorite albums by David Bowie is Diamond Dogs, and it really has a very similar vibe to the opening of this kind of that kind of smoky vibe going on. Not smoky vibe, but very there's
like a horror vibe. It's like a horror story.
Yeah, there you go. It's a horror story vibe as they get ready to introduce it, but it's very much like in their kind of stoner goofball kind of thing that they're doing. And it really is a great intro to the album, and then immediately is followed up by a very mediocre title track, which I did not sing love.
Yeah, they say it was a soft, gentle night. And then he says soft again. It's
Yeah.
a little bit repetitive. But that, I mean, what you just said is exactly right. There's an intro, and then there's a title track, Carnival of Carnage, which is basically serving the same purpose.
Mm-hmm.
They really could have done without one of them. I would have taken out Carnival of Carnage,
Yeah,
the
dude.
title track, and just changed the intro name to Carnival of Carnage. It's an intro to Carnival of Carnage, yeah. And and then get right into what I consider one of the two best songs on the album, The Juggler.
I get that.
Yeah, like, I mean, just sonically, the album, it uses that distorted bass sound. It's very West Coast songs. And when I hear this album, you mentioned they have a lot of great influences. I think so in some ways. And I think not so much in another. I mean, one of the major influences is from Too Short. Actually, a couple of them that I definitely want to mention is West Coast guys, and one of them is Too Short. And you think of it's a classic song. It's called Freaky Tales, which is almost 9 minutes long, and it's over a fairly repetitive beat. Just Too Short talking about girls he pimps out. So, Dan, can you play a little sample of Too Short, Freaky Tales?
These are tales that I tell so well. Too short. 3 weeks ago, I met this freak. She followed me around like Mary Sheep. I hit around the corner, and when she came, I grabbed her by the arm and I asked her name. She said it was Anita. Her man's in Santa Rita. I took her to my house and
I mean, Dan, doesn't that sound like a lot of the ICP album?
That is very much the vibe. Very much the vibe for about half the album.
Very simplistic rhyme style.
Mm-hmm.
You know, girl named Rita. You know, like,
Yeah.
and you know, kind of.
It's Moon and June of hip hop. Moon and June of hip hop.
It is. And let me say two things about that. Number one, I don't really dig Too Short. I don't really find him to be too interesting. There's not really much you can get out of it. There's just some outrageous pimp stuff. You know, he's very famous for saying bitch. And, you know, like musically, like it's not something that I kind of connect with. You don't really dance to it. I guess it's kind of like, you know, top down convertible, you know, music, or, you know, riding along Central Avenue, listen to that. But it's not kind of what I dig too much. Now, I got to mention, ICP later remade that song Freaky Tales and did a 60-minute version of it. They've been very clear that Too Short. Now, one thing that you could also mention, though, is that Too Short was super influenced by Iceberg Slim. And in this album, Carnival of Carnage, ICP does a lot of story raps, which I don't think they necessarily derive from Iceberg Slim, but maybe it's in the ether because Iceberg Slim was a Chicago guy, and he did his sort of pimp stories in rhyme form, which are found in his famous book, Pimp. And you know, he's playing dozens. He's doing simplistic street rhymes. Someone else, though, that was influenced by Iceberg Slim, who I like a lot more, and definitely had a big influence on ICP, was Ice-T, you know, who took his name, Ice-T, because his name was Tracy, and he did a lot of Iceberg Slim raps. So he was Iceberg Slim Tracy, right? So let's play a little bit of that, and you're going to hear another major influence on ICP.
Then all of a sudden, a bullet came through my eye. My dome exploded, and I felt my other brothers die. I drank my blood as I felt like shit into the street. My corpse stunk like a burnout rotten piece of meat. 10 brothers died in this stupid homicidal binge. Cause whenever someone dies, nobody wins. But this drama, you'll never hear a word of. Cause all the paper's gonna...
See, so with that song, you heard the graphic, violent imagery, really horror sound. I got to mention that song was produced by my man Africa Islam, who I did a tour with in China, so I definitely just got to give him a shout out. But with Ice-T, there's much more of a moral to the story, and the songs really, they have an arc to them. I think one of the major flaws in the album, and it really kind of depends on your perspective, but I really think that it lacks a sort of arc to the stories. Like, here's the thing. In the history of gangster, I don't want to just say music, but poetry, books, or whatever. Let's just take the film Scarface, right? Kind of classic, archetypical one. You can take the original film, and I'm forgetting the guy's name who starred in it. He also starred in I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. Anyway, then you have the remake with Al Pacino, and it's really, people really love the violent imagery and the coolness of, telling the cops to fuck off or whatever. But what's important is at the end of Scarface, they die. Those guys die. At the end of Pimp by Iceberg Slim, he loses it all, right? That really continued until there was a major shifting point with some super underground West Coast rap music involving people like Too Short. You get a hint of it with Philadelphia PSK by who did PSK? I'm blanking on his name. PSK, what the hell does that mean? But anyway, I'll get back to that in a second. But I think a major turning point was the first kind of Schoolie D did PSK. A major turning point.
I was going to say Schoolie D, yeah.
Schoolie D. In 1991 was an album that I think shifted hip-hop a lot, and not necessarily in a good way, which is not the first NWA album, Straight Outta Compton, the second one, which has a very outrageous title, which I'm going to stay for historical purposes. Get ready, hold your breath. The name of the album is Niggas with Attitudes. And that album is, I consider basically gonzo rap, where there's nothing redeeming about it. It is there to piss you off, and outrage you. On the first NWA album, there's Dr. Dre saying, don't smoke weed. There definitely is a political message in terms of, Fuck the Police is a response song. On the second NWA album, it's just fuck this and fuck that and fuck everything, and we don't care. If you don't like that, fuck you.
I'm going to correct you on this, though. N for Life is the name of the album.
Niggas for Life. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that right? And
it's also known as
Ethel.
Yeah, I was going to say it's Ethel for Zagan, obviously.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, for Life. So sorry, not with attitude. For
You're
Life.
Good. You're
right?
good.
Whatever. That to me was a major turning point, because with Too Short, you could say, well, he's just telling tales and all those things. With the NWA second album, it just becomes that. And I think ICP is kind of a thing. But one thing you have to consider is this. Dan, what's your opinion on this? Like, ICPs, I think their two main targets, maybe three, are the police, the South, which I know you're going to be very interested in talking about, and women. They go after police hard, which is a pretty typical, and many would say justified thing to go after. They're authority figures at the very least. Lots of female frustration and lots of frustration against people from the old Confederacy or the South, or racism in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Those were the three big ones that appear on this album. And they talk about that. I was listening to an interview with them that they did about 5 years ago following the death of John Kick Jazz. They did a nice long thing. And they talked about that. And they're like, Black in Your Eyes was not their prize moment. It's literally a song about hitting women. And and they ended up leaving it off of that when it got picked up, when this album got picked up. Of course, they recorded this as on Psychopathic Records, but it was picked up and distributed by Island Records, which cut two of the tracks from the album, one of them being Black in Your Eyes, because it's literally not much more than just a song about hitting on women. They're going with the horror rap thing, the horrorcore thing, the Ghetto Boys kind of vibe, and all that stuff that's going on around that same time. And whereas, some of their contemporaries up in Detroit were really talking a lot about rapping openly about Satan, they were like, okay, we got to take it a different vibe. they like the kind of that wholesale big gangster rap sound, at least with the first 4 or so tracks that they recorded, but they were spending too much money on it. They cut it back and went kind of minimalist. And yeah, but at that, they're like, okay, so we got to focus on the lyrics. We're going to keep this consistent across thematically as well. And so, of course, the clown thing is there for the whole time, but like the skits are always about sex with women or sex with women in the South, as we talk about in your Rebel Flag, and mixtures of all of these things. Some of them have 2 or 3 of them in there, but it's definitely their anger. And they admit this, is that they were very angry at the world, had a lot of negative views. And so they, instead of really distinguishing themselves stylistically and thematically, they went on the old standbys.
Yeah, and I think a major song that people need to look at when they're thinking about this album that was also released in 1992 would be, I got the feeling of imagining the Pearl Jam song Jeremy if it was sung from the perspective of Jeremy, you know. We talked about in 1992, you had a major school shooting. Obviously, that would foretell a lot more happening not too many years after this. We're talking about really, really frustrated kids. Both of those guys were in and out of juvenile and in prison. I don't know too much of the details about that. I hope to find out more. Well, and actually, I said 2. There's actually 3 of them. We'll get to that in a second.
Exactly.
It's just a very angry album. And some of this negativity, like I said, if I can find some sort of justification, or if it's done just for comical effect or slapstick, I'm fine with it. But a lot of it I didn't find slapstick. I found it just to be
kind of mean,
irredeemable, mean-spirited.
Mean-spirited. And I think that's where they kind of didn't have it really honed right then. One of the things actually, and I'll say this is a pro and a con, is that a lot of great ideas that they didn't develop fully.
I agree with that completely.
And that's one of them, is that like, hey, if we're going to take Kool Moe Dee's report card here, we would definitely give them a 10 for sticking to themes, just like Beastie Boys did back in the day. But there's other aspects of them that they didn't do so well. And that was one, is they really did stick on those themes, but they really did get kind of mean with it. And so some of the themes, I know you and I agree on this is one of the half-assed ideas that really could have been great was Wizard of the Hood. That was the one where they took, they basically, for those of you who haven't listened to the album yet, I'm going to recommend going forward that whenever you listen to our podcast reviews, we really hope that you come in and having at least listened to the album once beforehand. But to give those of you who haven't listened to this yet, Wizard of the Hood is essentially them walking through Detroit, picking up
Southwest Detroit.
Southwest Detroit, of course, the Southwest Gangstas, as Shaggy 2 Dope is called. And they're walking through and picking up the various characters in Wizard of the Oz. But of course, it's like, this guy's a crackhead. This guy's, and so it's got an interesting thematic vibe to it. But the lyrics aren't that great. They stick to the theme. They get a 10 for sticking to themes. That one didn't quite stick. Another one that I really like, I don't know if I'm ready to quite call it hip hop's Southern Man quite yet, but 2 of their standout tracks on this were definitely the 2 anti-racism, anti-South bigotry, hymns in this, the Redneck Ho and Your Rebel Flag. They still sell on their website, granted they're out of it right now, the chorus to a shirt dedicated to the chorus of Your Rebel Flag, which is simply 4 times over and over again, fuck your rebel flag. Which, interestingly, we'll get to this when we talk into the Clown College, but I was very interested in the fact that you go into this kind of expecting these guys are trying to shock as much as they can. They definitely don't do a great job. They definitely make fun of Mexicans at one point on one of their songs, Night of the Axe. But, they're anti-racism and of course, they're talking about going around and basically, having non-consensual anal sex with Southern women. But they're definitely
not great on homophobia issues either.
Oh, I was going to get to that too. That's definitely in my list of cons. But I will take that. Them going on this kind of it's a lot, an idea that they kind of have developed that I think is freaking great is they are hip hop's version of Southern Man by Neil Young. Two of their great tracks on there.
And just for people who are not familiar, Southern Man was the song that prompted Leonard Skinner, who was also from Florida, like Dan and I, to write "Sweet Home Alabama," because Southern Man went after. Was it just George Wallace specifically that inspired him, or was it just general Southern attitudes?
That's the best. I think it was definitely the George Wallace thing, but
yeah, Governor of Alabama.
Other pros.
Yeah, and I mean, it should be pointed on those theme that you mentioned though, as well. Like on First Day Out, when you talk about getting out of jail. What the first thing that he did was he goes on a date with a black chick. You know, like we're talking about a white guy specifically going on a date with black ladies in 1992, which shouldn't be outrageous. For some reason, like it did just kind of stick out to me. You know, this is many years after Sidney Poitier, but it's interesting. It's significant. Let's see here. Where do you want to go from here, Dan? Do you have something specific?
I was going to say I have a couple other pros. I'm keeping with the pros here. For it. So last thing is, I think so the last 4 tracks kind of all come together, and I think is really when they start hitting their
really.
I think that's funny because I really think it lags a lot in the middle, but I think it's their last 4. It's the Ghetto Freak Show has the homophobia vibe, which I did not dig, but I liked the good creepy vibe to it. So let's go with the last 4 tracks. Let's go. Never Had It Made. It's literally, I mean, again, half-assed idea, but this was them getting closer to taking care of it. It's literally birth to death, cheating death, escaping the morgue, and still dying through your own stupidity at the end of the song.
We'll talk about this in the adaptations part, but what I will say is of the story songs, and I thought the story songs were not a positive aspect to the album, this one had the most potential.
Agreed. That was my favorite of the story songs. After that was Your Rebel Flag, Their Southern Man, the better of the two. It was the one that had the best production value too, because they were kind of blowing a lot of money, and they recorded 4 tracks. It already dropped $6,000 on it, and there's like whoa, we're spending a little too much money, especially when we're going to sell 17 copies on our opening day. So they had to cut it back and really go down from there to cheaper production. But because of that, the production on Your Rebel Flag is really pretty good.
Yeah, I agree with that aspect of it, but it just pulls down the album that having this song on the album with Redneck Toe is just redundant to me. Like they really could have done without Redneck Toe. And look, either go strong and make the whole fucking album about this theme, or otherwise try to stay away from redundancy. Like that getting to the end of this album, it's already a long album. And you're getting to the very end here, and you've already heard a song that really touched on a lot of the same things. And I appreciate that ICP wanted to probably give their fans value, you know, but it just as a listening experience of an album, it made it difficult. Sorry for cutting you off.
No, you're great. You're there with it. And then Ghetto Freak Show, I like the vibe of it. The homophobia, the couple homophobic lyrics in there, not feeling it. It was not the strongest of the last 4, but then the taste. It's got that good kind of upbeat late 80s vibe. They're really cribbing the kind of the Beastie Boys style hard, but there's guest lyrics. They got John Kickjazz on there, kind of going back and forth with his brother, sparring on there. Capital E and Esham, who I can never pronounce his name correctly, but I think that's it. And they all take
It's Esham. He was kind of the founder of horror rap in Detroit.
Yeah, the acid rap, horror rap kind of thing, and I never remember how it's pronounced. But anyways, all of them did a guest.
And Jump Steady, which is Violent J's brother.
Yep, exactly. So they got some good guest lyrics on there. Okay to good guest lyrics on there. So the last 4 I thought was when they kind of hit their stride again.
Well, I mean, I know you're not the biggest hip hop guy, but like what they did was very typical at the time, which is the last track on the cut was the quote unquote posse cut, where you brought in your posse to kind of, you know, tie in to the community and bring people out. And I don't know, none of the guest verses really stood out. Esham's was, I thought, pretty good. He also did some other production on the album and was a big influence on ICP. We could talk about that. But one person you mentioned was John Kickjazz, who was the 3rd member of the group. He only shows up, I think there's like 3 or 4 verses from him on the album.
Yeah, it's not much.
And at the time, so the members of ICP were Violent J, who I think is really clear is the main talent of the group. He does most of the rapping verses. He's kind of more of the spokesperson for the group. Then you had who at the time was known as Too Dope, but we know today as Shaggy 2 Dope. To me, Shaggy 2 Dope has two main purposes. He was the better looking guy, right? Violent J was never the most, and still not the most handsome dude in the world, but you had the kind of more sexual symbol, the more handsome, more just kind of easy personality, it seems like. And he also did the graphics for the cover of the album as well. Not the best rapper here, especially I think Violent J really kind of outshines him.
Agreed.
And you have Shaggy 2 Dope's brother, John Kick Jazz, and in tribute, I'm wearing my Jazz for Jesus t-shirt, which is a Taiwanese jazz gospel group, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with anyway. Shout out to my buddy Andy, who plays trombone with the group. I thought his verses really didn't get it. John Kick Jazz, no disrespect to this guy, but it really didn't add anything. You really could have cut them out. A lot of songs on this album were 4 or 5 minute songs. Really didn't need to be that long, especially because the album wasn't very sonically diverse. You really could have cut all the John Kick Jazz verses off. This would be his only full album.
Yeah, and he only did 6 tracks on the album out of the 15. So there you go. So
I'm surprised it's even 6. I don't even think it's 6 full verses. Is it six full verses?
No. Some of them are just part. Yeah, exactly.
A little, like he'll do a bridge here or there or an introduction.
Exactly.
There's like 3 or 4 verses that he does, and he died in 2015 in a group home, which is really tragic.
We'll pour off some Faygo for him. I got to admit, 3 Faygo references in here, I believe. We should count the Faygo references going forward. As a child, Faygo was my favorite drink. Orange pineapple, shout out. Oh, yeah, we grew up going to Winn-Dixie. I can relate to the working class roots. I can't relate to necessarily where they came from. But we shopped at the Winn-Dixie, and I definitely was a Faygo fanatic. So I'll pour off a little Faygo for my man, John Kick Jazz here.
I did drinks when I was in Detroit for the first time last year in October. I did seek out and get Faygo to try because I was in Detroit. I had to get some Faygo. I love the Faygo references. To me, that's the essence of hip-hop. And I guess since we're talking about it, we can talk about it here a bit. Like, to me, there's nothing cooler in hip-hop that, and ICP represents this, which is subverting the commercial taste for your own. The most famous example of this is Run DMC taking a unpopular soccer football footwear brand, Adidas, and making it their thing and saying, sure, Nikes might be more expensive, Reebok might be more popular, but Adidas is our thing, and making that cooler, making that the coolest thing. And ICP does that throughout their careers, and something I have hold in great respect. See, like the last 4, but let me getting back to the album, the last 4 tracks to me kind of blended together. They didn't really get to be too interesting. I have 2 favorite tracks on the album. One is The Juggler, which is the first proper song on the album, and it's Violent J all the way. I love the sampling on there. You've got Prince, as you mentioned before, but in terms of the best rapping from Violent J on the album, I think you can find it on that track. It's straight ahead, braggadocious rap stuff, but to me, it's good old school hip hop. And the other song would be, do you want to guess what my other favorite song on the album is?
Give me a sec. I got to look at the track listing again. So you're saying it's not one of the last ones. No, I don't have a good one. I don't have a good guess. Maybe Guts on the Ceiling?
That's correct. I really liked Guts on the Ceiling. To me, that's the song that crosses over into surreal. I love the surreal imagery of the whole thing. It's about a guy without a face, without a head, rapping and communicating with people. It's truly surreal. It's something that it's the sort of imagery you'll find like in Suspiria or like a real like interesting horror film. You know what I'm saying? It's something like you realize you get it from Johnny Got His Gun, where you're hearing a voice but there's no mouth. You know what I'm saying? And I thought I really dug it.
Fair enough. I get it. That was one of the ones in the middle that I didn't think dragged. There was a lot of dragging in the middle, but that one had some good vibes to it. Well, here, how about this then? What's your favorite lyric, or what are your favorite lyrics or references you got?
Sure. If I was to pick a favorite lyric from the album, I would say it's this lyric. 'Cause my head exploded and my brain's unloaded all over this beautiful city, teeth and bones in the nitty gritty. The sort of cross reference between a beautiful city and this sort of violent imagery I find to be compelling and poetic in that sense. And that's from the song Guts on the Ceiling. What about you, Dan?
I'm going totally the other direction, and I'm taking one from Psychopathic, which is not, I think, one of their stronger tracks, but I think this sums up my favorite kind of how I feel vibe. So you might see me at a festival, cussing rude and scratching my testicles with a 2-liter in my hand, rapping to the bitch at the French fry stand. I love it. I love it.
I dig.
I love
especially
it.
when you say it, I dig it as well. It's real. It's something that I can actually see happening. I can visualize it seeing.
Exactly.
And it's specific to the culture.
It's very specific to the culture. It's definitely like, as somebody who grew up eating garbage food and just, I'm wearing basketball shorts throughout my entire childhood, not trying to look cool, definitely okay with eating garbage food and drinking 2-liter sodas all the time. That appealed to, that's a vibe I'm digging. That's a vibe.
It's such a funny thing because you are one of the bigger influences on me being vegetarian, which I was for a long time, and I'm still primarily plant-based as well. The whole thing's really funny. What in terms of the culture, though, one thing I definitely want to reference is a song which I think is sonically sticks out, and it's not a song that I hit on the album, but there's I have very mixed feelings about it, which would be the appearance on the album from one of Detroit's most heralded acts. I'm talking about the song Is That You? And the song features a young Kid Rock. And I have a snippet I'd like you to play from that. Can you hit it, DJ Danny Fitz?
Kid Rock, I'll probably eat that shit. Boo-hoo, motherfucker, what you cry for? I'm that nigga that your bitch would die for. No horse showed up at my
let me just say this. Before I get to the specific lyric, that song, and with Kid Rock's influence, I think, it seems, it's a really eclectic, interesting song sonically. Would you agree with that?
Okay, I'll give you that. It's the content of it is absolute garbage, but I will say that the style is it's good that he showed up there, and that I dig.
He references the yodeling, which he has on his solo. I think we got to get to in future episodes. We got to get to his solo album, which came out before this, to get a good context for Detroit. Like when he yodels, which is a reference to his first single there. When he says playing the bongos and the bongos come in, it's a sonically interesting song. I don't even necessarily think the content of the song is worse than anything else, but he drops the N-bomb there.
He drops the N-bomb, and I think, interestingly, I don't know, it's just like he dwells a little too long on how smooth his semen tastes. A little too long for somebody who wants to, make it aware to, how somebody, there's things that when you start talking about them for a little too long, you know a little too much about this, probably from experience, and it doesn't make me feel all that comfortable. A little weird. I know he's talking about a woman enjoying the taste of his semen and how smooth it is, but it's just a little bit like half your lyric is dedicated to that, man. I'm feeling a little weird about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. One thing, it didn't stand out to me. It's just braggadocious shit. But I think Kid Rock, his flow is much more sophisticated than ICP's, at least at this point.
Absolutely. Lyrically,
he has a strong voice. He has a strong perspective and voice, even if he's dropping N-bombs, which is real. Yeah, I don't know.
Which is a fun fact, is if you read about this, is of course he demanded that he get paid more money than the other person who was supposed to appear on the Isham, and he showed up to the first recording session to do his verse. He showed up drunk, so he had to actually come back the next day and re-record the vocals and the record scratching the next day. So
I respect all aspects of that.
Yeah, I mean,
there's not one aspect of that I don't get. That's what you get. You want Kid Rock to show up drunk.
It's in character. Exactly. It's 100% in character.
And he went back and he acknowledged that, hey, I showed up drunk, and he went
Let's
back
do
and
that
he
again.
fixed his things. Yeah.
So any other, I guess we moved on a little to the cons here. Where's some other?
That was a
cons?
mixed thing. Yeah.
That was a mixed thing. Yeah, like you said, that's a mixed things. Decent flow, decent. I like the variety it brings. The lyric on it, he clearly wrote it that morning on the back of the napkin.
Yeah. Well, if you have a specific list of negatives that you want to touch on, go for it.
I think we kind of talked a little bit about that. It's like Black in Your Eyes was not lyrically great. It has elementary lyrics. The beats were very, not very good. It was just not lyrically, it was, and musically, it was just not very interesting. I could see why it got left off. They hadn't really honed their offensiveness, the horrorcore kind of vibe yet. That took a little bit of time. And obviously, like I said, sticking to themes, they stuck to themes ad nauseum at times.
But they weren't developed. They were there, but it wasn't developed. Yeah,
exactly. And so that's kind of my theme. They cribbed a lot of good vibes, and so accordingly, they hadn't really established themselves. But like, you got to give them some. They were between the ages of 18 and 20 when they recorded that. I'm not going to give them too much crap about that. Not everybody comes fully formed. You're not a Tribe Called Quest coming out, firing on all cylinders for your first track.
Yeah. I definitely agree. Like I said, what was the other? That I think about it, what was the other song left off of the major label version of the album?
Ooh, I gotta double check that. I believe it was Wizard of the Hood.
If that's the case, I think I agree with the major studio there. I think I would have preferred this album without those two tracks.
Sorry, my bad. Yeah, Night of the Axe. It is Night of the Axe. My bad.
Oh, well, okay. Well, let me just say this then. I wasn't a big fan of that album, especially with the other story albums there. And that song had my least favorite lyric on the album, which I think represented the negativity, sort of the word saladness of I'm crazy sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And that lyric would be, ha, kleptopathic, and I'll fuck you up in a straight jacket. To me, it's just like, what are you're not talking about stealing. It's just sort of uninteresting braggadociousness, And
it's funny, it's the same kind of thing as same song, the other one, Night of the Axe. It's like thematically cool, naked murder spree. I kind of dug it. The skit in the middle with the cop thing, okay, kind of funny. But my least favorite lyric came from that too. It's like, it was like long, another one where it's like you dwelled a little too long on the fact that you're surprised that women poop.
Well, that's funny. So your least favorite lyric was from that album as well. That song as well.
From that song as well. And so it was just one of those, and it got left off. Coincidentally, it has nothing to do with why I picked it, but it was just like, I get it. It was not there, in terms of, it was just their least lyrically interesting one.
So it's really funny because I get into this a lot. I think sometimes studios can do good things and be useful, having that sort of editor there. I would have preferred this album with those two songs. Those two songs I don't think are very good, and it would have shortened that album to make it more palatable for a full listen, which is really funny.
Which I think kind of brings us to, we'll start kind of bringing into the home stretch here.
Yeah, exactly.
So to that end, we're going to try to do this every single episode. We kind of go through our pros, we'll go through our cons, favorite lyric, least favorite lyric, and a sort of rating. So obviously, because this is ICP, we're going to do this on a 1 to 5 hatchets scale. So 1 being your least favorite, up to 5. So where are you feeling this album falls on the hatchets? How many hatchets would you give it? I would give
this album 2 hatchets.
Mm-hmm.
If we were to break it down in decimal points, it would definitely be on a little lower than that, but I would give it a 2 out of 5.
I was leaning on the 1.5 to 2 hatchets out of 5. 1.5 to 2 hatchets is exactly independently. We seem like they're not at their theme. They got some good ideas. They're starting to get it together. A lot of flaws. Not going to be in the top half of their albums, I assume, by the time that we go through the whole discography.
So we're in consensus. I guess we'll say 1.5 hatchets.
1.5 hatchets it is.
If we're breaking them down into can you do half hatchets? I'm not even.
I guess it's just is it just the handle? Okay, we're going with the handle. Okay, it's a half hatchet. If
we're gonna do that, we'll both independently. We came to 1.5 hatchets each.
Sounds good.
Dirty Hair Dan how does this album compare with the Decemberists?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm gonna have to say it's better than the last 3 Decemberist albums.
Really?
I haven't
shocking.
actually listened. I haven't bought a Decemberist album since 2011. So
Sure.
it's
You're in denial. It's your favorite group.
the best group ever.
I am doing in terms of could I spin this album? A lot of it really, I don't think I could spin too much of. I could see putting Guts on the Ceiling on a horror themed background track. And I think I'm doing a hip. One of my favorite gigs is I DJ at a gym called F45, like a gym sort of thing. And we're doing a hip hop themed event in 2 Saturdays. I might try to spin part of the Juggler, especially with the Prince samples and stuff. I might be able to get away with it. We'll see.
I'm excited to see how I'm excited to see how like naked murder spree lyrics go. So if you could play Night of the Axe, I would be happy. But that'll do.
I might stick with the Juggler. One thing that I like to do is if this album was to be adapted in a certain way, we'll call this adapt or die, right? If you could take a song and make this a movie, or take an aspect of it, make it a play, or have it remixed, or really put it in any sort of different context, how would it be done? Is there some? Do you have something that?
I got something here. And it all ties back into Redneck Ho and your Rebel Flag. I see this as a Ken Burns-style documentary narrated by Shelby Foote, with black and gray and white photos kind of panning, and the Ken Burns style, the Southern Murder Anthology. So it's kind of like Southern murder tales. I mean, everybody knows about a good murder ballad. It's kind of their weird ass documentary of a murder. I call it the Southern Murder Anthology. And
maybe you could be a guest to talk about Danny Rawlings.
Exactly, and Ted Bundy, two legendary Floridians. Eileen Wuornos, if you want to keep it across. But you want to see in the Southern Murder Anthology, he's going to cut Wilbur's neck. He's going to break Hoss's back. He's going to stab Goober in the face. He's going to slit Jed's throat. I want to see all these things go on in this, narrated by that kind of like born in Mississippi, great Southern accent Shelby Foote. May he rest in peace. But I want to bring him back from the dead to narrate this. What do you got for your adaptation?
Okay. I see a movie, because it's a little difficult because you don't, I want to try to make it specific to the album, but I want to see an adaptation of this album, but the basis of it is going to be Never Had It Made. Now, it will be directed by Kevin Smith, who I think has always done a good job of highlighting the sort of underclass culture, but also gets into the sort of gonzo violence and stuff. I think it will be narrated by Johnny Depp, who Kevin Smith has worked with, doing a William S. Burroughs imitation. And it would be a Never Had It Made, starting with Violent J and Shaggy 2 Dope. We can forget John Kick Jazz for this adaptation. Suburban Life, get caught up in a crime, die, and end up haunting people. Directed by Kevin Smith, who will be going into a sort of red state zone in some of his outrageous gonzo things. We can have it even produced by Trauma Films. That's kind of what I see.
Good call. I'm digging it. All right. Well, with that, I think we're going to move on to Clown College. So I like this aspect of what did we learn about ICP? What did we learn about hip hop? What did we learn today on this? So what do you got, BO? You go first.
What did I learn? That's interesting. You really see the strong West Coast influence on ICP early on. I think we really see them still finding their foothold here. That's really kind of where it ends for me. Like, 'cause I think I came in with more of a basic knowledge of ICP. I knew that they were very anti-racist. I feel like, though, what we found here was the group kind of finding their footing. They weren't there yet.
All right. I agree with most of that for sure. I would have to say I did not know about the anti-racist streak. In hindsight, I'm not a whole lot surprised because they do have a very diverse community. The Juggalo community is, at least when I've seen videos of people there. And you always think it's white people, but I've actually seen plenty of people, across the spectrum. And so I think the fact that they had that anti-racist streak in them was really cool to me. And so I think amongst the fact that they're just literally trying to just piss off every single person they can, they're also like, you know what? Let's also throw fuck the Confederacy in there as well. And I'm like, okay, I dig on that. So that's kind of my major take home.
Yeah.
Like I said, very much but expanding upon what you said is, though, I definitely agree with where their references, the West Coast thing, the gangster rap thing for sure, but also some of the Beastie Boys feel. That Beastie Boys feel as well. So, but yeah, go ahead. What you got?
No, I dig it. Yeah, there's so many things we could talk about. The lineage. I think maybe not directly sonically, but influence from Funkadelic. The idea of a song title like Maggot Brain, or even Jimmy's got a little bit of a bitch in him. There's a whole bunch of different things, but we can explore those on future episodes. I'm sure. I think it will definitely be relevant for then as well.
Yeah, sounds good, man.
And are you more excited or less to go to the Gathering of the Juggalos?
Absolutely more exciting now. Absolutely more excited. Definitely looking forward to this.
I definitely think so too. It really gives a basis. We're starting at the ground level here, and even if neither one of us think this is a great album, it's a good first step in the journey. This is us realizing we're not in Kansas anymore. Just like they did in Wizard of the Hood, right?
That's it. Or that they're on their way to Delray.
They're on their way to Delray. Let's just mention right now, next week we will be going over the documentary A Family Underground. A documentary about ICP, which I really love, which is has a framing method of a British couple going to the Gathering of the Juggalos to get married.
And we'll share that link with them so that people can watch it beforehand, so that they know what to expect going into next week's episode, or probably 2 weeks from now's episode. We'll see how it goes. And let's give a couple thank yous. Thank you very much to Jillian Logue for designing our logo, for putting that together. You can contact us at why don't you give the contact, Dan? Yeah, we got a whole lot of ways to get in touch with us. We're going to try to make the media a BFD here for us so that you can reach out to us. We got, as you well know, our show is called The Road to Shangri-La. Our show is a podcast that. So it's going to be a Mixcloud account of Road to Shangri-La Pod, Instagram, Road to Shangri-La Pod, and our email address is going to be the road to Shangri-La pod @gmail.com. So you should be able to find us on Mixcloud, where we're going to post this. We have our Instagram account where we're going to be started up, Road to Shangri-La Pod, and road to Shangri-La pod @gmail.com.
And any other plugs you want to give again? You mentioned your Roti thing. Any other projects?
Nah, man. This and the Roti thing are my two raison d'etre right now.
So what's the Roti links?
Of course, for that one, the Roti, if you want to find out about my mission to try every roti in Grenada, that is Grenada Rotis on Instagram. So Instagram.com/Grenada Rotis. One word. No all caps. No caps, no spaces, however you do your little intro thing you do?
No stops, all caps, no brags, just facts.
Yeah, that. Something like that, sure. That's all I got. You got any other shout-outs you want to do?
Yeah, you can check out a Facebook and YouTube, any IG thing, page I have called Artger, ARTGER, which focuses on traditional Mongolian culture. We have my side project, which focuses more on my travails. That's at Funkyger, FUNKYGER. Hasn't uploaded anything for a while, but that's on YouTube. That's on Facebook as well. And you can find my personal Mixcloud, where I'll also post a link to this, at mixcloud.com/DJ BO Shanghai. I'm also on IG and stuff, but it's all good. Just find me. Hit me up in Shanghai. Book me for your DJ gigs. Do all that stuff. And we good, Dan?
I think we're good, man. We tackled Carnival of Carnage. Only 12 more studio albums to go.
All right. Well, that does it for Dirty Hair Dan Fitztastic. This is DJ BO with the Road to Shangri-La International ICP Podcast saying Dara Otsi.
The end.